In this class, we will be looking at the Anglo Saxon society, how the society was divided, the kind of rules and regulations they followed, the kind of primitive feudalism that was there in place, and how the land was divided. So, we're going to look at the basic structure of the Anglo Saxon society. So this is the Anglo-Saxon hierarchy. You can see here, hierarchy is a triangular kind of a structure, wherein right on top you have the royal family helmed by the king. The king is the first citizen or the prime citizen. So the royal family right on top. Then you have the major nobility, followed by the minor nobility. Then you have the freemen, and then you have the serfs or the bonded laborers, as in the slaves. So, who these major nobility is and who the minor nobility are, we'll be looking at that in detail. So, this is a structure, the structure of how the Anglo-Saxon society was divided. So, all the workers, landless, laborers, slaves, they occupied the lowest rung, the lowest tier of the society. Then you have the free men, and there are terms to describe these people. We'll see that in the following slides. So now, how was land divided and what kind of law and order was followed? So these people, the Anglo-Saxons, they were very, very clannish. Clannish as in they lived in clans. They were very attached to each other. So they stuck together. They stuck together. They lived in groups. So groups of families, they lived together, and that formed the basis of English villages. Now, English villages were called fells. Fells, and there was one family which was the most powerful. So that family would be in charge of the rest of the families in the village. Now, these villages were divided into these villages, like many villages, were grouped together into a larger unit. So many villages together, and they were called hundreds. So what is this hundreds? Hundreds is that unit which was occupied by 100 families, and who was in charge of these things? They are the local, you could say, local nobles called thanes, Tegens, thanes. They are called the local thanes or the nobles, and four best men from each village, they constituted the court of justice. So you have 100 families living together, and they were under the local thanes or the nobles, the most important families. And of these families, there were four best men selected from each village. And the group of these four best men, they constituted the court of justice. And how was the land divided? It was divided into hides, 100 hides. So each hide is an area of 120 acres. So 120 multiplied by 100 would be a hide, right? So 120 acre, why 120 acre? Because that was the minimum land owned by a family. Now, a group of few hundreds. So now we have already seen these hundreds, right? The villages, hundreds of villages, which was made of these larger units of hundreds. So a group of few hundreds formed a shire. A shire. We are looking at how the land and the people were divided. So you have families, groups of 100 families is what you call a hundreds, and a few hundreds together is called a shire. A shire will be ruled by somebody called a shire reeve. From that you have the word sheriff. The sheriff that we use today, sheriff is used for the local lord or the policeman or someone in charge, right? That's a modern connotation of the word sheriff. So group of few hundreds constituted a shire, which was under a shire reeve. So the sheriff would take care of the taxes and the law of the land. Now, so this shire, it constituted a unit of local government. So even today, when you look at Britain, this is the unit of local governance. So this dates back to the Anglo-Saxon period. Then you have a group of shires together. Group of shires together is called a county, and the county is under a powerful man, powerful person called an earl. Now you know who an earl is. Who's an earl? Earl is someone lording over a group of shires. A group of shires is known as a county. And these earls, they were very powerful and sometimes even more powerful than the king. For instance, we have already been acquainted with the Earl of Essex, Godwin, right? Godwin, who troubled the king and who staked a claim to the throne. So that's the kind of power these people had. Many of these earls, they were more powerful because they had lots of land under them, and because of that, they would have lots of bonded laborers also under them. So in times of war, in times of any difficulty, the king would turn to these earls for help and support. They're supposed to help them, right? In turn of some favor of, whatever, there were these kind of arrangements. So many of these men, they were very, very powerful. And what about the codes of law? So the earliest codes of law were codified by King Ethelbert of Kent and King Ine of Wessex, and these laws had been in practice for ages. You can see these are all very primitive laws, and as and when time pass passed by, you can see the laws were becoming more refined and more modern. But initially, they were very, very, um, you could even say, barbaric in nature. So punishment was by three methods. One was paying heavy fines. Second was through blood feuds, and the third one by outlawry. So outlawry. So heavy fines, as the name suggests, is that is, if there is a vendetta or a feud between families, then they had to pay. That is, if there was, you fought with somebody or you harmed someone and the court found you guilty, then you will be fined. Then you're supposed to pay a huge amount in gold, huge amount in money to the wronged family. So, what was the idea behind these heavy fines? It would prevent long, bloody vendettas between families, because families knew if they got into these kind of war, these kind of trouble with each other, they will be fined. So, all their money and property would go towards paying the fine. And in the end, what would happen to the families? They would become poor, impoverished, and they'll be out of what you call the nobility. Without money, without land, you are no one. You just become like any other serf, any other laborer. So this prevented people from getting into all kinds of battles, all kinds of fight with each other. And the fine was also called where guild as in man gold. That is, each person, the worth of each person was measured by an amount of money. So if you happen to kill or if you happen to trouble a nobleman, you end up paying more than if you had hurt or harmed a person who belonged to the working class or a merchant. So depending on your strata in society was your worth measured. So the higher up on the rung you were, the more you are worth. So so every man had some kind of an amount, you could say, written about, or a kind of money that was decided upon by the court of law. So that was about heavy fines. The second is feuds, blood feuds or duels. So if you challenge somebody or if you have a problem with something, you're supposed to fight it out. So kind of man to man sword fight and wrestling or whatever. We have seen these kind of fights in English movies, right? So blood feuds. So the feud would end with the death of one of the feuding persons, right? So it would only end with somebody's death. So all these kind of feuds were fought in the name of honor, in the name of being wronged, like that. And the last one is outlawry. Outlawry is like, what it means is you'll be exiled and the property would be taken away and wrecked, destroyed by the wronged party. That is, the court has found you guilty. For instance, you remember the Godwins, they were asked to go away from the country when Father Godwin, he refused to follow the orders that were given by the king. You remember that, right? So outlawry, it meant you will be exiled and your property would be, the good things would be taken away, and the rest of the thing, like your house and other kind of property, it would all be wrecked and destroyed by the wronged party. So this was how disputes and problems were settled during those days. Now, there was this council of wise men called the Vitangamot. The Vitangamot, in short, you call it the Vitan. The Vitangamot. So, what is this Vitangamot? It's the highest assembly in the Anglo Saxon kingdom, a council of wise men. It was like an advisory body. So, if you are going to compare that to today's parliament, maybe you can compare it, but then not as powerful as today's parliament. The king always had this option not to listen to the Vitangamot, but then a successful and a mature king would always listen to the Vitangamot. Why? Because Vitangamot was represented the people of England from that is the whole England was represented by the members of the Vitangamot, and obviously the king would be able to understand or you get the feel of the land through the voices of these people, these representatives. So if the kings were ratified, that is given sanction by the Vitan, that would be more acceptable. So any mature, seasoned, and diplomatic king would do well to listen to the advice of the Vitangamot. And this membership to the Vitan, it was not hereditary. The king could nominate anyone to the Vitan. And in the same way, kingship was also not hereditary. Please remember that kingship was not hereditary. Vitan, they chose the strongest and the ablest of the royal household. So there was nothing like hereditary. It's only later that we find some more or less kings making their sons the next ruler. Like that, it became kind of a tradition, a kind of a custom wherein it became hereditary. But then initially, kingship was not at all hereditary. So the crown would go to the strongest and the ablest of the royal household. Is a painting of the Vitangamot. You can see all these royal men sitting together. This is a collage of the Anglo-Saxon society. You can see some, maybe these are some workers filling the field, and a typical painting of from that particular time. It's out of imagination, whatever. And here you have the way these people are dressed. So looking at their dressing, we can make out their station in life. So here you have the royalty, the one below this picture, right? You can see the king, and here you have a priest at the end. Then you have a royal lady, and the top picture here to the right side, you have a class of warriors, maybe learned men. I mean, we have to assume that these are those kind of people, people belonging to these different rungs of the hierarchy. So again, you have a picture here of the hierarchy. You have the peasants and slaves right at the bottom. Then you have the local lords known as thanes, and above them you have the earls, the powerful men who ruled over counties, and right on top you have the king. And here you have a picture of a helmet, the kind of helmet that used to be worn by these soldiers and warriors. So this was found at a place called Sutton Hoo. There was a shipwreck, and after many years, I mean, the archaeologists, they were able to dig this out, and they reconstructed that particular helmet they found. So the warriors and soldiers, when they went out for war, maybe they used to wear something like this. So this is a prototype of the kind of helmets that were worn by the soldiers and warriors of the Anglo-Saxon period, and the archaeologists, they call it the Sutton Hoo helmet. It's just to get an idea the kind of life they used to lead, the kind of dressing they used to favor. Now, what about primitive feudalism? Society was more or less divided into three classes, three main classes. You have the earls, men of noble birth and large estates, and among these lords, that is, among these earls, the most powerful one from the most powerful family would be the king, right? So, right on top, you have this class called the earls, and under them, you had this group called churls. See the spelling? It's pronounced churls. Ceorls. Churls. And who were the churls? They were free men, but they had land. They were owners of small holdings of land. And below them, there was this group called Theowas. Theowas are the slaves. That's a name given to the slaves, Theowas. Now, what about Thanes? We already saw Thane, this group called Thane referred to in 2, 3 of the slides that we had seen, right? So, Thanes are actually not born Thanes, the local lords. They are not born local lords, but then they could be given this honor by the king. So, sorry, so they were above the churls, but then see, churls are the freemen. So between churls and earls, you have this group called thanes. So how did one become a thane? Maybe by one's own deeds, one's own bravery. If you do, and if the king is pleased with you, then you can be made a thane. So a theova could become a thane, even a churl could become a thane. So they were local lords, and if you continue to be a local lord for some time and then you get more property, you become more powerful, then there was every possibility that you could become an earl. You understand? So this was not really hereditary. Things, they were not that kind of hereditary, and it afforded a kind of a mobility, upward mobility to people who aspired to climb the social ladder, social rung, and become more powerful and rich. And when you look at the life of these people, we can already understand, right? You can only imagine that life was really bad for the Churs and the Theovas. Churs, why? Because they had to cultivate the land and they had smaller holdings of land. And with a small piece of land, you cannot make much profit, right? So they had to cultivate and they had to be faithful to their overlords, that is, earls. So whenever earls asked them for money, they had to pay taxes, they had to give men their own men. So that way, all the time they were burdened. So all their life was spent cultivating and providing things for the overlords, that is, people belonging to this class called the earls. So it was, in a way, an unfair way of, you could say, stratification, very unfair. It was unfair to the churls and the theoas, whereas the thanes and earls, they enjoyed the fruit of the labor that was done by the churls and the theoas. So here, if you look at this picture, peasants, that is the theoas right at the bottom, they had to work the land for the thane is here. Then you have the churls, they were free to work, they could rent land, they had small bits and pieces of land, but then they also had to report to the thanes. So the thanes were the local lords. Now this class, all they had to do was all the time working, obey laws, and pay taxes. All their life was spent in doing that, whereas people up here, they had a better life. Things things why this line here? Because this shows the mobility, that is, many peasants or many churls, they could aspire, they could try to become thanes. And the earls, they were the most, you could say, privileged class, most privileged, and among them the most powerful would be the king, and they were the ones who made all the laws. They could give and take land from others, they could raise army, that is, in times of war, battle, they would raise army. And where would this army and all the money come from this bottom of the pyramid, bottom of the pyramid, as in from the churls and the peasants. And right at the bottom you had slaves, who were even worse off than the peasants. This is just an old map of London and River Thames. So the names are all Greek and Latin to us. I mean, very unfamiliar. So the old English names. So we really don't know what they stand for today. So this is the river, and this is the city of London. So Anglo Saxon names, Anglo Saxon cities, which we are not quite familiar with. So that is about the life of the people during the Anglo Saxon period.